Hi, Miles Seecharan here from Next Action Associates, and I'm here today talking with David Wadsworth. David's in North Manchester. I'm in Manchester, so let's start with a little bit of an introduction. David, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Miles mentioned, I'm David Wadsworth. I'm the managing director of a company called Cornerstone DM. We're a full-service marketing agency based just on the outskirts of Manchester, and work with clients primarily across the UK, but also globally in more recent years, forming full service marketing strategies for them, and also dealing with sort of day-to-day tactical and project delivery, whether that's a web project or a small digital project, straight up to sort of national and global campaigns. And our services span creative, digital, PR, web, marketing, and even print. So quite a complex business. And we've been going around 13 years now.
Great. So busy life, and obviously we're here to talk about GTD, the methodology, and how that kind of helps you with it. So would you like to tell us how you kind of first came across GTD and what it was about it that kind of got you interested?
Yeah, so I actually remember having a conversation with a representative from a local business support service called the Growth Hub. Many people have probably come across them before. And we're actually sat having a pint and a meal just after an event that we'd been part of, and sort of explaining the speed of the business, the pace that it was growing to this guy, because we were growing at the time around 30-40% year on year, and we'd had 3-4 years sustained growth. And this guy had a really interesting backstory. He talked about generally having a nervous breakdown in a previous role. He talked about really being in a dark place, suicidal in some instances as well. And it really sort of captured my attention because he talked about his previous role where it was workloads, it was overwhelm, it was burnout, and he couldn't really see the wood for the trees. And that really resonated with me and what I was experiencing at that time. The business was relentless, the hours were, and the demands on sort of myself and the time were exactly the same. And it just felt that the volume of tasks really were way too much for any one human being to really cope with. So it was great to sort of speak to him and learn a little bit about GTD, and that really attracted me because he talked about how it gave a sense of order, using your time based on your energy and your approach, and it just felt like a very idealistic and at the time an unachievable sort of outcome, but it did sort of really pique my interest. And then I finally took the action of speaking to yourself, Miles, and I've mentioned it to you many a time in conversation that I was looking out of my office window here. It was a rainy day and you were on a bus journey at the time, seeming very calm, relaxed, and had it all together really. So I kind of wanted a piece of that feeling, and knew that GTD was going to be a good opportunity for me to explore and try to pull some sense to the chaos, I suppose, that was in my work life at the time.
Excellent. The calmness of the rainy bus journey. Yes.
Absolutely.
So what was your work? What was your kind of day-to-day working life like? A bit more. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that before you started, to implement GTD?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'd moved from being a really small business where we had a very flat structure. So we'd gone from being a team of about 4 or 5 people to suddenly being a team of 20 people. Still not massive, but the growth was significant and in a very short space of time. So I'd gone from being across everything in every department on every client project, really just having to react to those client requests day in, day out, and also dealing with onboarding a team at the time of probably about 10, 12 new people that all needed inductions, all needed training and sort of introducing to clients and projects and so on. And the days were just long and hard. There never seemed to be an end to it. The inbox never seemed to even get a dint to it. The voicemails were stacking up, the WhatsApps, the messages, all these different inputs that were there. They were sort of overwhelming, and you kind of felt that you were never achieving anything because you were just dealing with what was in front of you at the time. And it was pretty brutal. It was a brutal couple of years, really, trying to deal with that. And even just trying to make sense, I had to-do lists about to-do lists that never really got done because they just weren't in any sort of order. So that's one of the things that really drove me to realize that I just needed to take a step back and look at how I manage these tasks and also how I manage the business, really, which, GTD filters through all areas of our business and all areas of my life now as well. So
yeah. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about the now? That was the before. So, I mean, how do you experience work and life now?
Yeah, so now was much more structured. And I still remember something that you'd mentioned to me really early on about falling off the wagon and not to get too disheartened when you fall off the wagon. And I think a few conversations I've had either with yourself or my partner is that there's days when I feel that I've just got my little fingertips still on the wagon and just desperately trying to get back there. But the beauty of GTD is it's a really solid system that allows you to recover those things very quickly and very comprehensively to a point where you have clarity. So now I've got more structure to my day. I know that I've got a single source of truth to all of the tasks that I've got, not only within work, but in my personal life as well. So it just makes those work more seamlessly together. And really, I base my work on my energy at the time. So there's certain periods in the day that I'll be much more focused, much more able to do, the tougher tasks that I need to get through. So it's great having my list split out by energy levels, morning or afternoon work, evening work, whether I'm at home, on a journey and wanting to make calls to clients, which obviously through COVID doesn't really happen anymore, but will do when we get back to it. And really GTD allows me to look at not just what's the loudest sort of thing screaming at me, but what's the most important. And a lot of that comes from the natural planning model, which at first I was a little bit skeptical of. I kind of thought, okay, how does that bolt into the day-to-day and the challenges that are thrown at you with, we've got something like 160 clients and 20 odd team members. So it's never always that easy, but what it allows me to do is just come back to that and just look at those areas of focus and think about how this is impacting the long-term success of the team, the business, the projects that we're working on, and really allows you to prioritize not what's the loudest, but what's the most important, really. And one of the big changes that I made is giving myself uninterrupted time within my day. So I have a focus day each week and I'll have focused time within the week that the team know that I'm not available. And it felt a really harsh thing to do at first because I'm naturally wanting to be involved with the team and always there to support them and give them whatever they need. But what I found is that I was doing a lot of things very poorly by doing that because you never really were fully invested in any one of the things that you were doing. Whereas now having focused time, having my lists prioritized to the energy that I've got at that time allows me to clear the tasks that are toughest and then have real focused time with the team or the clients to work with them, mentor them, deliver on projects and so on.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting thing I'll come back to about the team. But one thing that we perhaps haven't mentioned is that we did this work together entirely within lockdown. I think around the time that we started it, it just started basically. Yeah. So you were already, you'd already moved into that, and you were kind of experiencing that transition. And so now it's coming out of it. I'm just wondering if you've kind of got any reflections on how this has helped you, particularly because of the year that we've had, and how you've managed those challenges of work and being at home more and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I think every business has faced significant challenges over the last 12 months, and we had exactly that. And I think using sort of those areas of focus and those long-term goals, that really helps us to map out where we focus our energies and within what industries, what areas of the business we're wanting to grow and really develop. So I feel like GTD did help us in that respect, because it allowed us to really, well, clarify. It's a big part of GTD, isn't it? Clarify what matters now, how the market's changing, and how we deal with that. And then I think from a day-to-day team management perspective, it's made me more effective as a mentor and a support to the team, because I'm capturing things far better than I ever have done. So when you're at arm's length, like we have been through having to use Microsoft Teams day in, day out, and only seeing people in 2D or via message, I've better been able to follow up on those things and deliver anything that the team needs. So it's not been that difficult for us to operate remotely, being totally honest with you.
Right, yeah. And there's one of the team right now.
Absolutely. The only device that I didn't mute.
I do recall when we were doing this that I had the sense that you were a kind of, bottleneck's not the good word, because you described it as much more of like wanting to be very, very present,
very accurate,
very, very supportive. But was causing you personally a lot of problems being in that kind of role for so many people in the team. And what's also interesting is that you have been coached in GTD, but your team haven't. So I'm wondering if you could tell us about anything that has happened as a result of that, and how that are they aware of it? Do they notice anything different? Has anything changed about your kind of relationship? So tell us about the team.
Yeah, so I think certainly in the early months, they thought I'd joined a cult and gone a little bit strange, because I kept talking about this weird thing called GTD and didn't stop talking about it, because I was seeing the benefit week in, week out as we're sort of going through the one-to-one training that you delivered. But I've seen huge differences in the team, and we've not sort of intentionally delivered any training as yet, but we are due to. We're actually wanting to get the entire team, or at least our senior management team, trained. But some of the changes that I started to see were really interesting. So every meeting I was asking for an agenda to be put there, and I basically was quite awkward about going into a meeting without one, because I wanted to see what we were planning on doing and why we were planning on doing it. And it's something that I used to be more lax with internally. I'd always do it with client meetings, so it kept us on track, but internal meetings, we didn't. So that was a key change. One of the things that I do notice now is that a lot of the team talk about next actions, and that's not something that I've forced them to do, but I think just in the way that I've talked and interacted with them, they always say, so our next actions are, and our follow-ups are. And it's brilliant, because we did have an issue where certain team members would sit in a meeting and then they'd expect that follow-up to come from either myself, which again put more pressure on having to brief them, or other key team members there. So it's really been a change in their attitude and approach in terms of how we structure meetings, how we structure tasks and work with that. And even bringing the natural planning model into some of our biggest brand planning pieces of work over the summer of last year was brilliant, because it really kept everyone on track. And that's filtered down now into different ways of working within the business. So how we plan our client retainers, for instance, over the long term is very much planned around a GTD style model. Just keeping our focus there, which we historically had in different places. But again, it's this single source of truth that we talked about with the systems and task allocation. So that's all been really positive with the way the team are working. And I think one of the things that they did notice in me is that I'm sure they thought that, well, they were shocked by the amount that I captured and followed up with, let's put it that way. So historically, they knew that I'd forget half of the things that we'd discussed, or I'd not quite remember when we'd talked about it. I'd know something had been discussed, but there was always that vagueness to those interactions, which made it difficult. And at the time we started working together, I was probably getting through couple of thousand emails every week or two. So it was difficult to actually even trace back how you know what you'd asked someone for, or when you'd asked them for it. Whereas now I'm using my waiting for lists, I'm using my someday maybes, and I'm using my agendas. And the team have really seen that shift. They know that I'm far more on point, and I know when I've requested something, I know when I'm due something back. So I've seen much more receptiveness within the business, which ultimately has filtered down to our clients getting a similar level of service. So it's had a massive impact on the internal, and we're only scratching the surface of it at this moment in time. So there's much more work for us to do across the business to make it a wholly more GTD environment, I suppose.
Well, what was their feeling about that? Were they pleased to see that kind of greater level of sort of follow up, or did it make them uncomfortable? I'm just wondering.
A bit of both, to be honest with you. So some of the team were far more organised than I ever dreamt of being able to be myself. So some of them I envied in terms of their organisation, and they loved it. They loved the fact that I was much more structured and detailed and got those responses in place. Others, I suppose, kind of used it as a method for hiding the old way of working. And when I started to drill into this detail and follow up pretty much relentlessly every Friday morning, going through that waiting for folder, or I also within our studio system have a waiting for list per team member and per client as well. So they started to get into that routine that they knew that I was going to start chasing every Friday morning, and they didn't want that on a Friday morning. So yeah, there's been a mix of that, but I think generally now everyone knows what the score is, and they're working well with it and tolerating my follow-ups, like I say, each week.
Okay, great. You've sort of alluded to some of the kind of GTD tools that you've are most useful for you, things like agendas and waiting for lists and so on. I just wonder if you'd tell us about the actual tool that you use as well for your system, because I think this is kind of interesting, because we're certainly, when I encountered it, I'd never even heard of it before, and so there was a kind of a learning curve for me, but I think it's quite an insight into how GTD is so flexible that actually it's really not about the tool and anything can do it. But you've got quite an interesting tool. So I just want you to tell us a little bit about that, because people are always interested in that.
Yeah, absolutely. So like you've mentioned, when we first started looking into this, the route most people typically take is something like Microsoft Outlook, isn't it? They normally use their inbox as a management tool, and everything sits in there. Because of the way our business works, we've got a central studio management system, and everything that happens within the company happens through there, whether it's a comment from a client, a project brief, a project timeline, an invoice, a quote, everything is in there. So I had to think about how I could actually translate, say, your structure from Outlook into that. And like you said, it was effortless, to be quite honest with you. The setup was pretty quick and easy. It took an hour or two to get the basics in place. And then the system just really evolved as I learned how I needed to work with it and how all these other inputs worked alongside that. So really, it's like a big to-do list for me. It's a big project management tool and to-do list. And like I'd mentioned earlier, I'll have agendas in there. I'll have my someday maybe list in there. And every task that comes through to my inbox gets put straight into that tool, because that's really where I spend my days working. That's where my planner is, my calendar, all the rest of it. And through third-party integrations, I've been able to then connect external services into that. So things like Skype, Teams, Microsoft Outlook, they all feed into it. So that does become my central source of truth. And everything else is just really a funnel into that. So I work on that day to day, and I've managed to set up my home life in that as well. Sad as it may sound, but that's in there as well, just so that everything's captured nice and neatly, and I pretty much know where that is. What I still do use every now and then, though, well, pretty much daily actually, to supplement that, is still a good old notepad. So the things that I need to capture through the day that I might not have the time to jump on a system with goes on a notepad, and then that gets put there in an evening ready for the next day and planned accordingly. So yeah, that's absolutely, that's it. And it's still got its place. I try to be as paperless as I possibly can, but it still definitely has its place. So I lug around a laptop as well as a notepad, and that just basically gets, like I say, rewritten every day based on what's come in and then filtered into my system as and when.
Great. Well, I'm not going to let the moment pass. For you talked a little bit about GTD in your personal life there, and a little sheepishly thinking maybe it would seem a bit odd. So that's fertile ground for finding out more. So tell us about how GTD kind of intersects with your personal life.
Yeah, I mean, I think running a business of any sort, there's always going to be overlaps. And at first I felt very guilty about doing anything for personal life within work time. And really work time was all the time. And I think that's where it felt stifling in a lot of ways. You felt there was no real breathing space because I'd be working on evenings or weekends and still do, but to a lesser extent. So I think just having that understanding that, well, actually, if you need to run an errand for your personal life at 2:00 in an afternoon, that's fine because I'll be there at 7:00 in the morning doing work at times or in an evening. So managing it as a whole rather than two separate entities, I think works really well for me. And it's flexibility that we're trying to instill with our team as well, allowing them to build more flexibility into the day-to-day schedules and sort of work-life balance is really key. So I think that's been important for me from a personal perspective, and then just capturing things in a far easier manner across birthdays and so on. Like I say, because I've got a single source of truth, it just makes things so much easier to manage as opposed to my old school route, which was really to try and remember everything. You've only got so much mental capacity, and sadly by the end of a working day mine was completely used up at that point.
Yeah. Excellent. Great. Well, I think that's sort of all of the questions that we kind of discussed and had an idea about. There is one that we like to finish off with when we do these sort of blogs and podcasts, and that question's, what's the coolest thing on your Sunday maybe list?
Okay, so I'm well and truly into anything with an engine, to be honest with you. Anything that's full of adrenaline and goes faster and faster is always quite cool. So I've got the car and I've done sort of different track days and so on. So one thing that did go on my Sunday maybe list as a bit of a treat is actually a boat. So like I say, I thought, let's go to the waters and see if there's anything that we can do there. So certainly within the next few years, the plan is to try to get that. And depending on how I feel, you can either go for speed or you can actually just enjoy a few beers out on the water away from work and technology.
Well, it would be lovely if we could finish by kind of giving a salute to a famous program from this part of the world, Bullseye, and we could wheel out the speedboat and give it to you. But alas, that's not going to happen. So instead, I'm just going to thank you for your time. I think it's been really revealing, and I'm sure it'll be helpful for the people watching and listening. You implemented GTD at a time which was challenging, and just listening to you talking about kind of the growth of the business and the speed of it, and that was a tough environment to do it in, and great results. So thanks very much for sharing them with us, and good talking to you.
Not a problem. Thanks very much, Miles.